Viewers are invited to drop their location and local time down below, because while it might be early morning for one person, it could be a sleepless midnight for another. And sometimes knowing where everyone else is watching from feels like you're all sitting on the same porch sharing a story that's too wild to make up. The day at Pine Valley Ridge begins with that crisp mountain quiet, a silence only broken by a woodpecker or the faint rustle of pine needles in the breeze, until suddenly the peace is shattered by the crunch of determined footsteps on gravel, like someone auditioning for the role of a mall cop who takes herself way too seriously. Through the cabin window, Jack Davidson spots her, Linda Harrington, mid-50s, blazer paired awkwardly with hiking boots, clutching a clipboard like it's a medieval shield, and storming forward as though his rustic porch swing were a national security threat. She points furiously at the fire pit, then his restored '72 Bronco, then the American flag swaying above the porch, her face turning a shade of red usually reserved for cartoon thermometers. She shouts about violations of neighborhood integrity, a phrase that sounds important until you realize it was invented over breakfast cereal at her kitchen table. Jack, retired after 4 decades of military service, steps outside with his mug of coffee, still in jeans and a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of cedar smoke, the look of a man who finally thought he had earned a little peace. Before he can even speak, Linda has already dialed 911, announcing in her best courtroom voice that illegal structures and unauthorized activities are happening at this very moment. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser climbs the drive. The deputy's initial casual stride transforms when his eyes land on Jack. He stiffens, then snaps into a perfect salute, crisp as if he were still in the academy. With solemn respect, he addresses Jack as General Davidson, asking if everything is in order. The birds, which had fled at Linda's screeching, almost seemed to return to listen. Linda's clipboard slips, clattering against the gravel, and she gasps like a fish yanked out of water before collapsing in a heap right there, blazer and all. Historians still argue whether fainting in your enemy's driveway is technically a surrender, but if it is, Linda nailed it. Jack had never sought recognition here. After 40 years, Pentagon marathons, overseas tours, and handshakes with presidents, he wanted nothing more than quiet mornings with fishing poles, hand-carved furniture projects, and nights by the fireplace without anyone calling him sir. But peace in Pine Valley Ridge died the day Linda bought the old Jameson place and decided this patch of Colorado wilderness needed structure. With a surprise vote at a community potluck, she crowned herself HOA president, compliance officer, and self-styled community standards director, wielding laminated notices like Holy Writ. At first, it was almost comical. His second flag outlawed, his firewood stacked non-uniformly, his truck facing the wrong direction in his own driveway. And once, truly, she insisted coyotes howling at the moon were actually his dog breaking acoustic preservation guidelines, despite the obvious detail that Jack didn't own a dog. He burned the first notice in his fire pit, which probably drove her twice as mad, and every new violation only made her grip that clipboard tighter. She brought along 2 timid sidekicks, Gerald and Pete, men who looked perpetually trapped in a bad middle school group project, hauling her extra clipboards and filing boxes while she peered through binoculars into Jack's workshop. The petty harassment, the absurd rules, all of it piled higher until the morning she dragged the county sheriff into her crusade, not realizing that the man she thought she could intimidate was the same general whose command the deputy once served under years ago in Afghanistan. The sheriff's salute still hangs in the cool mountain air as Linda, revived with water from the cruiser, launches into shrieks that Jack is committing the ultimate crime, impersonating a military officer. The deputy, Sergeant Morrison, stares at her like she's just claimed the moon landing was filmed in a Denver basement. He calmly asks if she's really accusing a decorated 4-star general of stolen valor. She doubles down, demanding proof in a voice sharp enough to peel paint. Jack disappears briefly into his cabin, returning with a box that smells faintly of cedar shavings, holding decades of a life spent in uniform, retirement papers, a military ID, and a framed photo of him shaking hands with the president. Morrison doesn't even need to glance. He remembers the general from his own first deployment, the same face, now aged by a gray beard but unmistakable. Still, Linda grabs the photo and, with the confidence of someone who once thought Beanie Babies would fund retirement, declares it's photoshopped. Morrison lifts his body camera, politely invites her to repeat that, and suddenly Linda finds religion in silence. The plot begins to unravel when Morrison requests her official authorization to operate an HOA. She proudly presents a laminated document that looks suspiciously like it was whipped up on Microsoft Word, complete with cheesy clip art borders. A quick call to the county clerk confirms what everyone half suspected. Pine Valley Ridge has no registered HOA, never has. For 6 months, Linda's been pocketing $200 per household from 23 cabins, raking in over $27,000 under false pretenses. She claims it's for community improvements, yet the only visible upgrade is a golf cart painted with HOA President in large block letters, which she drives around like a dictator patrolling a banana republic. Morrison presses harder and Linda admits the funds sit in her personal savings account. But she insists she keeps careful records in a spiral notebook. Historians still argue whether a spiral notebook has ever counted as an acceptable accounting system, but in this courtroom-worthy saga, it certainly doesn't. Her hapless deputies, Gerald and Pete, seize the moment. They blurt out that she assured them the paperwork was handled, that this savings account scheme was standard practice, and that she spent thousands on absurd items. 500 violation slips, a single-page website built by her nephew displaying her own photo, and matching embroidered blazers she demanded they wear like uniforms. They refused, choosing dignity over polyester. By now, backup units arrive, not for danger, but to help log the mountain of fraudulent nonsense piling up in the driveway. And as flashing lights bounce off the pines, neighbors wander over, voices eager with their own stories. Tom Sullivan recalls being threatened with a $500 fine for outlawed wind chimes. Margaret Chin for hosting the wrong species of birds at her feeder. Each tale weaves a portrait of Linda's paper crown empire, equal parts theater and extortion. But the real twist comes when Detective Rodriguez, meticulous and unsmiling, arrives to sift through the binders Linda reluctantly produces. Inside lie hand-drawn property maps in red ink, lists of violations for things like non-approved porch laughter hours, and a master plan to enhance the community with rules more fit for a dystopian novel than a mountain retreat. Nestled in her notes is the true endgame. Force out owners, especially Jack, and open the door for her sister Rebecca, a Denver developer, to swoop in and snatch up prime land. Jack's 5-acre spread with creek access is the crown jewel, already mapped out in Rebecca's draft plans for luxury cabins. The so-called HOA was never about harmony, only leverage. Linda's clipboard crusade was camouflage for a real estate scheme as old as land itself. As neighbors circle closer, murmuring about wind chimes and bird feeders, Detective Rodriguez begins tallying up what now looks less like overzealous rule-keeping and more like a criminal enterprise. Text messages confirm Rebecca Harrington bankrolled the whole charade, promising Linda a fat slice of profits once longtime residents were driven out and their cabins flipped into resort parcels. It's a scheme straight out of a cheap soap opera, except the victims here are real people who just wanted to chop firewood and sip cocoa in peace. When the county prosecutor arrives that very afternoon, Linda's clipboard dreams come crashing down. Fraud, theft by deception, conspiracy. The charges read like a menu at a diner nobody wanted to sit in. Her beloved golf cart, complete with its HOA president lettering, is towed away as evidence. And if there's ever been a moment where justice tasted sweeter, neighbors swear it was watching that cart loaded onto a flatbed. 2 weeks later, in the fluorescent chill of the county courtroom, Linda tries to represent herself. She argues with the same misplaced confidence that her fake bylaws carried, claiming she was preserving property values. The judge, a veteran himself, stares down from the bench as she sneers that Jack's military record has nothing to do with being a good neighbor, even suggesting a general might not understand landscaping. That's when the gavel slams and the room goes still. The judge reminds her she's staring at up to 15 years in prison and 6-figure fines, and maybe she ought to focus less on Jack's hedges and more on her own legal survival. She wilts, then bargains, finally pleading guilty to reduced charges. The sentence: restitution of all dues with 20% interest, a $40,000 fine, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Rebecca, equally exposed, walks away with 2 years probation and a $30,000 fine. But Linda can't leave quietly. When the sentence is read, she leaps to her feet, face flushed purple, declaring it a miscarriage of justice. The judge, who has surely seen every tantrum known to man, adds 50 hours of community service for her outburst, specifically at the local Veterans Affairs Hospital. The irony lands like a drumbeat. She will spend her weekends serving the very people she once mocked. She stomps her foot like a child denied dessert, her lawyer tugging at her sleeve in desperation, but the order is final. Out in the hallway, neighbors trade smiles of relief. Jack, who has said little throughout, only nods, the faintest glimmer of a smile beneath his beard. And here's where the story drifts into softer tones, because after so many fireworks, there's a quiet kind of justice worth lingering on. Imagine the pines swaying again over Pine Valley Ridge, the sound of creek water tumbling over rocks, the slow return of mornings filled with birdsong instead of shouting. Jack goes back to his fire pit, splitting logs with steady hands, smoke curling into air that feels a little cleaner, a little freer. The neighbors, once wary of Linda's clipboards, stop by with coffee or casseroles, reminding one another that community is built on kindness, not laminated rules. History books may still debate whether petty tyrants are born or made, whether people like Linda crave control because of deep insecurity or simple greed, but here the conclusion feels clear enough. Her empire collapsed the moment sunlight hit it. And while her sister counts fines in Denver, while Linda files papers at the VA as part of her service hours, the ridge itself exhales, back to being what Jack came here for in the first place. A retreat where silences wait, where the flag waves against a wide sky, and where dignity is measured not by rules on paper, but by the respect between neighbors. So wherever you are tonight, morning, evening, midnight shift, let the sound of that mountain quiet follow you into sleep, a reminder that even the loudest noise eventually fades, and peace, in its stubborn way, always finds its path back home.